As a former CIO and someone passionate about technology, today I want to cover the future of IT and maybe through that, the future of work as well. I am grateful to Bala Arumugam, Vice President in UiPath, with whom I had several discussions about RPA and related technologies. And you could say this presentation is triggered by the discussions I had with him. Now, if you had consulted the CIO surveys of the last 25 years, the biggest problem has always been the same thing, the IT backlog. IT demand far outstripping the supply. And there is no sign of this abating at all. Now, let's see why this is happening. Typically, IT approaches things with what I call as a big apps mindset. We identified big problem spaces, and for each of them, we roll out big apps, either on prem or cloud based apps these days. Now, because of the software engineering methods we use, there is always a gap between the problem and the solution. This results in filling the gap with customizations, manual processes, spreadsheets, point solutions, and now these point solutions could be SaaS cloud based solutions as well. On top of this, every big app implementation creates a data silo. Ironically, even if you bought the big apps from the same software vendor, because of the way they have been implemented, the silos could still get created. I have come across instances where the same primary key was implemented in two different ways in two different big apps from the same vendor in the same installation, thereby making the collating of the data across those apps difficult. So we have tried to integrate them through SOA, ESB, various EA technologies, now microservices, master data management tools, data warehousing, BI tools, analytics, and now lately artificial intelligence and machine learning. All of this has created even more gaps, which has resulted in even more manual processes, spreadsheets, and point solutions. To add to this, we now have a huge proliferation of devices through the digital revolution, IoT, and so on. The technology is also becoming rapidly obsolescent. The typical tech refresh cycle of 4 to 5 years is not able to keep pace with this rapid obsolescence. Now, if you are a typical Fortune 2000, you have to add mergers and acquisitions to this mix, which results in the same big problem solved by two different big apps in two different parts of the same enterprise. So, with the result that the IT blueprint looks like this spaghetti. To make matters worse, I recently noticed a data point that Microsoft Excel and Google Sheets now have 2 billion plus monthly active users. These are nothing but the unaddressed problems that IT hasn't found time to address, and again, this is also growing rapidly. This seems like a pretty bleak situation, but I noticed a couple of positive trends that we can leverage. The first one is the small or micro apps technologies. Now, I'll tell you why I call them with this name. The RPA technologies, the low code, no code technologies. I have just mentioned a few of them. There is a number of companies doing this. Kissflow and Zoho Creator are from the city that I live in Chennai, so I want to highlight them. Now, there's another interesting category which could be called nano apps. Right? I think this category was pioneered by the company IFTTT. If this, then that. If this, then that. For example, you could build a nano app that every time you post a photo to Facebook, you email it to your grandmother. You can do something like this very easily. Now, Zapier and Microsoft Flow are enterprise versions of IFTT, you can say. iOS has a cool app called Shortcuts, using which you can build these nano apps. I have built several of them and it's pretty cool. Now, Gartner, for their part, are saying that by 2025, most enterprise apps will be developed in part using low code. So, this seems like a very big thing starting to happen. Now, for us to take advantage of it, I think we need two things. One is IT has to develop a more of a small apps mindset, and employees in all the companies, especially the large companies, should have a machine first mindset. And this machine first mindset was coined by our customer Sundara Sukavanam, who is Chief Digital Officer of FirstSource. You might have seen the recent press release from FirstSource, which, for gratefully so, we mentioned Tiny Magic's contribution to that program alongside UiPath. So this was a citizen developer program for about 100 people. And I'll give you one example from that. There's a woman who had to develop these PowerPoint decks for employee rewards and recognition. So every few weeks, every month, every quarter, she would collect the employees who need to be recognized, their contributions in text form, and their photographs, and put them into a nice looking slide deck and distribute it to everybody. This would take her 3 to 4 hours per instance. And she would do this, take this work home because she didn't want the day job to be impacted. Through our program, she spotted the opportunity and she overcame her fear of programming and developed this PowerPoint bot using UiPath Studio X, which did the job in like a few minutes. Now, there were other people in the program who developed 100 bots in this program. And it created a massive business impact for FirstSource. Interestingly enough, if you look at these bots, none of them would have made it to the list of a centralized RPA team because they are too small to be developed by a centralized RPA team. It wouldn't give them the ROI. So if you don't have a citizen developer program, you will never address these types of issues and they will fall into the unaddressed bucket of IT or the IT backlog. Maybe it won't even make it to the IT backlog. Let me give you a nano app example as well. Let's say I'm a salesperson and I want to get notified every time an invoice of more than a certain threshold value goes to a particular valued customer. When that happens, I would like to call that customer and express my gratitude to them. Today, I would have to raise a change request to the IT department or maybe take somebody's help to use the business intelligence tools to maybe create a report and monitor the situation. So if I'm able to build this app, how nice will this be? So this kind of app development infrastructure would be a massive force multiplier on the IT department. So how will we provision something like this? I propose that we do a data layer type of approach. On top of the big apps and the data silos, you have a reference data store for the master data, which doesn't change that often, and a data lake of the transaction data that is collecting data from all the operational systems. Now, in fact, in the 1C program that I talked about, we did just this. We also developed a small apps engine using which we were able to develop 700 apps in the last 3 years. And that just the top 25 of them created a $1.1 billion impact. Now, we had developed it for the enterprise IT team to use it. This engine couldn't be used by citizen developers. But with RPA and the nano apps technologies, even citizen developers could develop these apps and you can hook them up to the end user channels, laptops, iPads, emails, text messages, Microsoft Office documents, chatbots, and Alexa and other voice-based assistants. If we can do something like this, I think this would represent the future of IT as well as the future of work, where every employee in every organization writes code. And this could finally have a massive impact on the IT backlog. And maybe a few years from now, that item will no longer appear in the CIO surveys as a big problem. I hope to see that day soon. With that, I thank you all for listening to my coverage of the future of IT and the future of work.